This message comes from eBay. The worst part about loving cars might just be buying them and all the parts. From Toyotas to Aston Martins, eBay has thousands of cars and the largest online selection of vehicle parts and accessories. eBay, things people love.
Hey, just a heads up, today's episode is going to talk about fatal incidents of gun violence. So, by now, you have probably heard her name. Renee Good. She was a 37-year-old woman who was killed last Wednesday by an immigration and customs enforcement officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Bystander footage shows masked ICE agents coming up to Good's car. One officer grabs at her door handle, and when she seemingly attempts to drive away, another officer circles to the front of Good's vehicle from the opposite side, draws his gun, and fires into her car, killing Good. You may have seen this footage. It's horrifying to watch. And within hours, two very different narratives started to emerge about what you can see in that video. Kristi Noem, the director of Homeland Security, says Good was attempting to ram the agents with her vehicle, but the analysis of different bystander videos by Minnesota officials sharply contradicts that claim. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey called Noem's account, quote, a garbage narrative. But Good's story is more than a debate between officials. I want to understand how her story fits inside the larger context of state violence and how it marks a shift in our understanding of government aggression. To do that, I have Abene Clayton here with me. She's the lead reporter for the Guns and Lies in America series at The Guardian. Abene, welcome back to It's Been a Minute.
Hey, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. All right, Abene, there are multiple layers to Good's killing and how it compares to other moments of gun violence. There's the fact that she was a U.S. citizen who was shot. And I don't have any confirmation on her racial background, but she appears to be a white woman, very fair-skinned, blonde hair. Not the demographic that comes to mind when, many Americans think of who the typical victims of state violence are. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it was a federal officer who shot her, not a local police officer who shot her. When you started covering this story, what layers stood out most to you?
Yeah, when I started seeing the coverage and started looking into this shooting and killing of Renee Good, I immediately started to think about, the fact that ICE, these federal deployments of ICE and the National Guard in other places across the country, like the alleged entire goal of these things, if you believe what the Trump administration has to say, is like to reduce crime, right? I'm always in this line of work, I'm always super curious about how officials at all levels are like, we're going to address crime. We're going to keep your families and your neighborhoods safe. And a part of all of these deployments was this idea that like, if we remove people who are not here legally, then gun violence, robberies, all these things will drop. And so that's the first thing that kind of came to mind, that like, is this what the crime fighting is supposed to look like? What is going on? Will people see this as a sort of unfortunate but necessary step towards public safety? And then after that, I did think of some of the like racial dynamics, right? Like Brittany, you mentioned that by all appearances, this is a white woman. And something I know from covering mass shootings is that the ones that become the most high profile and are discussed the most often have that element of like, oh, that usually doesn't happen here. This usually doesn't happen to this person.
To this kind of person.
Yeah, exactly. So those were some of the initial things that came to mind that sort of made me realize that like, oh, this is going to be a big one,
I also want to note that this is not the only shooting by a federal immigration agent in recent months.
Oh, not at all.
According to the New York Times, there have been 10 incidents since September 2025. And even the day after Renee Good was killed in Minneapolis, federal agents shot and wounded 2 people in Portland, Oregon. When we talk about law enforcement shootings, it's usually in the context of local officers. What do you make of the fact that these are federal officers?
Yeah, I think that's something that we are less used to seeing. And I think the fact that it's federal agents for a lot of people, especially on the left, they're kind of like, well, we told you this would happen, right? You're sending the National Guard, you're sending in these DHS agents under the guise of like, this is what is going to prevent violence in your community. And instead, what we often see is like, people one being afraid. We've seen, in addition to like the material gun violence, like you have stories about kids not showing up to school, people not going to work, people deciding to self-deport, and families being kind of torn apart that way. So you have all of these sort of layers of violence. But of course, in the US, gun violence is one of the most kind of visible forms and gets the most response from people. It's just so American. She was shot, right? Which is something that we continue to see time and time again. I think the fact that it's federal officers makes it such a like Trump administration 2.0 story, because we've seen how much the Trump administration stands, 10 toes down on their decision to deploy federal agents to fight local crime, or at least that's what they're saying. And I think a lot of people were like, oh, called it. Like, we knew this would happen, right? You'll often see people like comment like, this is what y'all voted for. This is what y'all wanted. So I think people are seeing some of their concerns from this past summer really come to fruition in a way that feels like a little unprecedented. And unfortunately, some of these situations are resulting in like literal gunfire, which feels crazy to a lot of people, especially because like we don't talk about like federal police reform, right? We talk about body cameras, local police, things that can reduce shooting, de-escalation, but
that's a very good point.
This is kind of uncharted territory in a lot of different ways.
These are not the first moments that federal officers have killed American citizens. I'm thinking of the 1967 Detroit Rebellion, where at least 7 civilians, including a 4-year-old child, were killed by the Michigan National Guard. I mean, my mother grew up in one of the neighborhoods where the tanks were rolling in from the National Guard. She was a child, like middle school age when this was happening, and she could see this happening in front of her. And that's my first reference as a human being of the National Guard and what they do. I also remember learning in middle school about the Kent State shootings back in 1970, where 4 civilians were killed by the Ohio National Guard. In each of these situations, the civilians were seen as threatening, or at least somewhat relatively threatening in the situation, whether they were allegedly looting a store, like in Detroit in 1967, or protesting the Vietnam War, like the young people at Kent State University in Ohio in 1970. And in the wake of Good's death, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem alleged that Good's actions amounted to, quote, an act of domestic terrorism. How does this kind of framing affect how we think about state gun violence against civilians?
Honestly, seeing people like Kristi Noem and J.D. Vance sort of say like, oh, this is the result of like radical leftist domestic terrorism, I mean, it definitely muddies the conversational waters. But I don't know. I just don't know how much weight to give those kind of comments, because it's so typical and so basic, right? Like Kristi Noem saying like, oh, this was an act of domestic terrorism. It's like, well, yeah, obviously she would say that. You know what I'm saying? It's, again, like kind of.
So it's not that kind of comment is not surprising from her.
No. And I'm not sure that it would land with someone who's genuinely trying to like understand and wade through this really like complicated and, as we've mentioned, like kind of unprecedented for some of us, like conversation. I don't know how much that would sway that person. I think it's more of like an echo chamber thing, personally.
This reminds me of a conversation that I had quite a few months ago, but it had to do with immigration and kind of some of the cruelty of some of the tactics. They said that perhaps the cruelty was the point. And I wonder, to the point that you just brought up, that these kinds of comments may not really be meaningful, or they may not shake the table much for someone who might be trying to earnestly look at these facts and figure out what's going on. But they do create a lot of noise, to your point.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, might the noise be the point?
I think that's a really great way to put it. And I think I'm probably going to borrow that the next time I'm talking about a high profile shooting. It
It's
very
yours.
well
Go
may
for
be
it.
in front of you. But yeah, I do think the noise is the point. After so many high profile shootings, I think that people immediately are like, this is my opportunity to make a point that I've been trying to make. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to
Mm.
purposefully muddy the waters to make it about domestic terrorism, to try to prove that this is why we need to give ICE more money. This is why we need more guns. We need more people to do this, because there are domestic terrorists like this woman out here who are trying to protect people who are here illegally and keep them in the country, right? Like, it kind of whips up these other fears, even though obviously we do not know much about this woman. So for Kristi Noem, I mean, JD Vance did the same thing at a press conference. It
Yes.
was like, yeah, someone threw a brick. Who paid for the brick?
When somebody throws a brick at an ICE agent, or somebody tries to run over an ICE agent, who paid for the brick?
That's a purposeful muddying of waters, a purposeful dog whistle that speaks to this like ongoing conspiracy that there's some leftist cabal that's like purposefully making things harder for ICE agents and targeting them and trying to ensure that they're met with violence every single where they go, despite the fact that like this investigation is so early. We really don't know much. People are still debating about what they saw in this video, what angle they saw it from. But here come these officials who we look to for the official word on what happened, and they're just like saying stuff. You know what I'm saying? They're just saying things that speak to other efforts.
Things that are not, haven't been founded. That also are
100% that haven't been founded.
you can't prove or disprove at this point.
No, not at all. But they do align with what the Trump administration has already been saying and the points that they've already been making to justify some of these other policies.
Coming up,
There's got to be another way to express pain and to honor this woman's legacy, I think, without appropriating a phrase and a movement that is specifically about women whose deaths go undercovered, uncared about, etc.
after a quick break.
This message comes from Whole Foods Market. Follow your wellness goals and save big with sales on supplements and vitamins. Explore an abundance of high-quality multivitamins, probiotics, and protein powders. Keep good habits going strong. Cook homemade meals featuring sustainable wild-caught sockeye salmon and many more delicious and lean protein options. For wellness when you need it, shop Smart Meal shortcuts to stay motivated, like ready-to-eat salad kits. Shop all things wellness at Whole Foods Market. Support for this podcast and the following message come from Recorded Future. Every day, millions of cyber threats compete for attention, but only a few truly matter to your business. As a leading threat intelligence company, Recorded Future cuts through the noise with precision intelligence. That's why top banks and governments trust them, because security leaders don't just react. They foresee, spotting the signals that others miss, and acting before threats become setbacks. Recorded Future. Know what matters. Act first.
This message comes from LinkedIn, who knows how even one hiring nightmare can ruin your small business dreams. That's why LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant uses insights from over 1 billion professionals to create a personalized shortlist of the best applicants, and even finds candidates you would have otherwise missed, so you can hire right the first time. Start hiring with LinkedIn and post your job for free today at linkedin.com/NPR.
Finally, I think it's important to note that we know Renee Good's name. It feels like at this point, almost all of America knows Renee Good's name. But some folks online are using the phrase, quote, say her name in connection with Good, which is a slogan meant to address the lack of coverage of Black women who have been killed by law enforcement. It's also worth noting, of the victims of shootings by ICE officers, Good is the first victim to receive this level of national attention. Like, we know her name. What do you make of this?
You know, Brittany, that's a fascinating question. So many things come up that I'm trying to
Take your time. You could find it.
not say her name, girl. Okay. And the fact that my reaction is that immediately, I think speaks to my own sort of like personal Black feminist womanist politic. I do a lot of work in my journalism and outside of my journalism life around like Black femicide, right? Black women being killed in all of these sorts of situations, whether it's by police, whether it's, a stray bullet in an incident of community violence. More than often, it's their romantic partner, the parent of one of their children who's doing this. And when I go to rallies and when I talk to organizers and when I'm like in the same space as all of these Black women who are trying to wade through these terrible, minimally covered things, say her name is a huge thing that's said, right? There's so much power in being like, say her name, right? Breonna Taylor, say her name. There's a woman who in Los Angeles was killed and her mom's fighting for justice still. Maikiana Johnson, say her name, right? Like this is something that has been such an important piece of reclaiming these stories, right? Like it's so easy to write Black women in particular off and our deaths off as being like, oh, well, she was loud, she was this, she was that, she was hanging with this and that. And it's been a real important piece of resistance, right, for our community. So that's in my mind. You feel me? And then to hear that it's being applied to that feels very like, oh, slow your roll, baby. You know what I'm saying? And obviously, absolutely no disrespect to this woman. What happened to her is awful. Like kids are being left without parents. This community has a hole in it.
Tragic.
What I am about to say next is not in any way to dismiss what happened to her or the level of tragedy that this is. And however, the fact that we're shocked that this happened to a white lady now means she gets this sort of treatment that Black women honestly have had to create for ourselves. It's like, it feels a little like appropriation in some ways. And again, it almost feels weird to say that because something truly tragic happened, but to use the say her name, y'all are, there's got to be another way to express pain and to honor this woman's legacy, I think, without appropriating a phrase and a movement that is specifically about women whose deaths go undercovered, uncared about, etc. Right? Like Renee Good is getting a treatment that even in death, even other people who have been shot by ICE and police do not get. And I'm sure a part of it has to do with race, like I mentioned before. The sort of, there's like always these very particular elements that I see in shootings that make them either super high profile or only covered locally. And a huge one is like, well, this usually doesn't happen to these people, right? Like you see people talking about like, she was just a mom driving a car and she was this, like this doesn't happen to them, which I think is kind of like a messed up way to think about violence in the first place, right? Because like, well, who should it be happening to? You know what I'm saying? It's always my question. I'm sure like, people are having good intentions and just see something that they may see as like a commemorative way to remember somebody. And so they're saying it. I don't think they're purposefully trying to obscure or literally whitewash this phrase that has been used for and by Black women after tragedy, but it does make me feel super weird. Does that make sense?
I think
I'm doing my best because I'm like, what, girl?
No, I think that's a very fair and honest answer. I also wonder too, if the goal for some people is to draw some type of organized attention to the victims of this kind of state violence. It seems like another slogan or another phrase would be more appropriate because it allows people to organize around something that all of these that these victims have in common, as opposed to maybe trying to link this poor woman's unfortunate and very sad killing to a dynamic that doesn't really apply and might not serve their goals.
You said that much more elegantly, and that's exactly how I feel, because it's like, I think people like kind of use what they got. You know what I'm saying? So when you have a phrase that's already ready-made, that already has a lot of power behind it, that brings up very specific feelings and images, like people are just going to kind of place that where they can. Does that make it right? Does that make it appropriate? Does it make it any less weird? No. But I do think if we're going to have these conversations, it's like, say all their names. You know what I'm saying? Say everyone's name, even if they weren't killed necessarily, right? Victims of state violence. Like, how either wide or narrowly are we going to cast this net? And those conversations absolutely need to be had. But as Abene Clayton, the reporter and Black woman, when I hear say her name applied, frankly, to a woman by, for all intents and purposes appears to be white, it does bring up some discomfort in me, right? And it's like there can and should be a specific sort of call to action and way of remembering and thinking about people who have been lost because of this kind of violence. And I would hope that folks who care deeply about this matter and see Renee Good's death and are horrified by it, are being galvanized by it, find something specific that will, of course, like as all movements do, pull from, actions and sayings before it, but are specific as to not do harm to the folks who are the sort of quote unquote typical victims of this kind of violence.
Abene, I want to return to something that I brought up earlier. The day after Renee Good was shot and killed by an ICE agent, 2 more people were shot by a Customs and Border Patrol agent in Portland, Oregon. How might the shooting of Renee Good and these other shootings change how we think about gun violence?
I hate to be cynical.
Be honest. That's what we want. We want you to be honest. Yeah.
People always ask, like, is this the one that's going to do it? Is this the one that's going to update our understanding? And that's just kind of not how it goes. We just follow such a specific playbook in the US around what happens with shootings that, like, I don't know that people are even going to see this as gun violence, right? When it's a police officer, when it's an official doing the shooting, people say like, oh yeah, this is gun violence as well. And they will get shouted down, especially by like gun rights conservative groups, saying a police shooting is gun violence is like, well, no, actually it's this. Like, I don't think people have even found a way to talk about state and police violence as gun violence enough to even begin to have this conversation. And like we said before, like this conversation is already so noisy that at a certain point, I think that the gun violence element will be stripped from it. And it'll be about so many other things. It'll be about immigration. It'll be about crime. It'll be about Trump. It'll be about conspiracies around leftist violence and all of these sorts of things that, like, the fact that this woman was shot and killed and died in a way that so many Americans do. I do worry that we're going to lose the plot on that one and it's not going to move the conversational needle as much as it should, honestly, like, because this is such an example of like, yeah, state violence is gun violence. And as a side note, whenever someone's like, oh, well, this isn't gun violence or that isn't gun violence, I always ask like, okay, well, what separates that from any other shooting? You know what I'm saying? Like, since she passed away, the funeral is going to be the same. The pain that people feel from this loss is the same. Her injuries that led to her death are the same as any other person who has been shot and killed. And so I just think people have such a mental block and hold so tightly to their images and perceptions around what gun violence is, which differ depending on, your background, your political affiliation, et cetera, that like it might be years or months, et cetera, before we actually see how this causes this conversation to evolve. But based on how things are shaping up right now in my experience with these sorts of things, I don't know exactly how much this is going to move the needle, particularly around state violence as gun violence. On other things, sure, but that very specific niche, which needs to be talked about more, so I'm glad you asked about it, it's not looking good so far, Brittany.
Well, Abene, you have been here with us during other major moments of gun violence over the past 2 years, the killing of Charlie Kirk and the killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Thank you so much for always being here, even when it's tough.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate y'all for having me. I'm glad the insights, do something.
That was Abene Clayton. She's the lead reporter for the Guns and Lies in America series at The Guardian. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Corey Antonio Rose.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. This holiday season, stop overpaying for wireless and switch to Mint. Shop 50% off unlimited plans at mintmobile.com/switch. Limited time offer. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12 months. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Above 35 gigabytes, network may slow when busy. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See mintmobile.com. This message comes from Amazon Pharmacy. Imagine having anxiety, and then, on top of that, having anxiety about your anxiety meds. You might stress about whether the meds are going to get refilled on time, or if you need a renewal, or if you need an appointment for a renewal. And then there's the general waiting in line at the pharmacy anxiety. Amazon Pharmacy makes it easy to get your meds, and they'll send them right to you fast. With Amazon Pharmacy, healthcare just got less painful.